I have many, many reasons for being pleased to be asked tonight. One of which is, I perhaps say at the beginning, I'm an incurable archivist myself. I've kept everything all my life. And I went to the Heritage Lottery Board not for money for myself, but I thought possibly if they gave them all to the British Library, that it might be interesting to index them while I was still alive. And a lot of very snotty people came. They looked at them, they thought they were all too recent, though actually they go back to 1930. And also they said, you're still alive. Well, I wasn't prepared to make that sacrifice. And so they are rotting in the garages, and I hope will survive. But I think for the university and the TUC to come together on this is a really important event. And perhaps I can touch, first of all, on the way in which technology can make it possible for people to use our history. I mean, in a way, if you look at communications, it's all marked by the level of technology. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, put it on tablets of stone. Well, they're difficult things to make available. I think if you'd been interviewed by Jeremy Paxman on Newsnight about that, it would have been a very interesting discussion. Where have you been, Moses? Oh, Mount Sinai. Oh, you have you? What have you brought down? 10 commandments. Well, what's the first one? Honor thy mother and father. Well, you don't live in the real world. You know, it's been very, very difficult for Moses to have got it across. Then we had Caxton and printing, and that was a tremendous change. And of course the establishment censored the press, that was what Milton was about, and Hansard was in prison for reporting what went on in the House of Commons. Hasn't yet reached that point. Then you had Rowland Hill and the Penny Post. Now, as Postmaster General, I wasn't able to move the head. Saw the Queen, she said no objection. By the time I got back to my office 10 minutes later, the Palace had rung number 10 and rung my office, so it stayed on, but it's a bit smaller than it used to be. But the thing about the Penny Post was it was the 19th century equivalent of the internet. It allowed people to communicate to each other cheaply. And the printed paper post, and tremendous revolution. And then broadcasting comes along, and now the laptop brings all the world's information to your own living room. If you have grandchildren who can tell you how to do it. And therefore I feel this is, from that point of view, tremendously important, and I'm glad to see, well, Irene Wagner, the librarian of the Labour Party, and the librarian here, working together on something of such excitement. Now, can I turn now, before I mention a trestle, to trade union history. I must tell you the best exhibition of trade union history I've ever seen in my life was at the Public Record Office in Kew. They asked me to go and open it. There were posters, there were leaflets, there were pamphlets, there were everything. And I said, where do you come from? Oh, they're all from the police files. And the Home Office had made them available. I don't know whether the TUC has been to see that, but you really ought to, because I'd be surprised if you had as good a record. Mind you, that was when trade unionism was a sort of terrorist organization, and they watched it, and some people still think it is. But the point about trade unionism is the media don't report trade unions unless there's a strike. I mean, they're not remotely interested in what goes on unless there's a disturbance. But what they don't understand is the role that trade unions have played in developing our political history. I mean, in 1832, which may seem a long time ago to you, but it was only 18 years before my grandfather was born, in 1850, trade unions were legal. And Parliament was elected by 2% of the population, all of whom were rich men. And it all began with Tolpuddle. Brendan, we were down there the other day, and you've heard me say this, but the thing about the Tolpuddle model, not only did they discover if you went to the farmer together, you had a better deal than if you went alone, but of course they were punished. They were taken to Dorchester Magistrates' Court, and George Lovelace and others were sentenced by Squire Frampton as convicts to Australia. I've got an American friend who's just been in Australia, said, how'd you get on, old Tony? He said, they're really great, but my God, they're really tough. So I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, when I asked for a visa, they said, have you got any criminal convictions? And I said, no, is it still required? And that was how it all began. And when they came, now I mentioned Frampton and Lovelace. George Lovelace's great-granddaughter was the secretary of the Bristol South East Labour Party. And Squire Frampton's great-granddaughter was the Speaker's secretary of the House of Commons. And when I put up a plaque to Emily Wilding Davison, Squire Frampton's great-great-granddaughter helped me with my electric screwdriver screwing it up. So history is very much nearer than you think. That's the only point I'm making there. And of course, once the trade unions were organised, they realised Parliament was totally unrepresented. The Chartists came along, and then later the suffragettes. And don't ever think that any of these changes were approved at the top. The House of Lords did not have a debate in which they had one peer said to another, "My lords, I think we've been a bit unfair to the working class." That wasn't how it happened. And actually, when women got the vote, it wasn't men said to each other, "I think we've been a bit unfair to the wife." It always had to come from underneath. And of course, when the vote extended, then you had what is now known loosely as gas and water socialism, because municipal votes allowed people who couldn't afford what they needed to buy the services by voting instead of previously all in the hands of those who had cash. I was in Birmingham during the war learning to fly, and I've always tried to study the history of where I was. And after the Municipal Corporations Act of 1837, Birmingham had municipal schools, municipal hospitals, municipal police, municipal fire brigade, municipal museum, municipal art galleries, and a municipal airport where I learned to fly. And that was a product of trade unionism, campaigning for the vote, getting the vote and using, and that, of course, was where the welfare state came from. And Keir Hardie, of course, wanted to have explicit political representation, but at the Dundee TUC in 1888, I was very young at the time, so I could only just recall it, but Keir Hardie was denounced by the TUC as an irresponsible man causing division in our ranks. Why? Because he wanted the Labour Representation Committee, and the TUC thought that was a bit too political. And the Labour Representation Committee then Clause 4. After all, Clause 4, if you take the first bit of it, to secure for the workers by hand and by brain the full fruits of their industry. Well, what's wrong with that? I don't know whether the new version is to secure 50% of the fruits of their industry. I don't want to anticipate the way that it might work. But what interested me about Clause 4, it was drafted at 41 Millbank by the Webbs. I was born at 40 Millbank. And I worked at 40 Millbank in the Millbank Tower. Well, I worked in the Millbank Tower, and that's where the Labour Party is, and they repealed Clause 4 on the very same geographical site as it had been drafted in 1980. It's very interesting, that, to me anyway. And out of it all came the welfare state, the Open University, and it not only the TUC formed the Labour Party, but in 1931 when MacDonald defected, it was Ernie Bevan in the TUC who saved the Labour Party. Only 50 Labour MPs left. My dad was defeated in 31. And then 14 years later we had a landslide, and it was the trade union movement that kept the Labour Party online. And then in 45, the Parliament to which I served as a backbencher at the end, you had Ernie Bevan, a trade unionist, Foreign Secretary, you had Nairn Bevan, a miner who was responsible for the health service, and of course you had Jim Griffiths, another Welsh miner, First Minister of Pension. Contribution to the trade union, absolutely ignored by the media. Totally ignored. They live in the Westminster Village where nothing happens unless some minister or shadow minister says it. And of course the new anti-globalization and peace movements are a part of that new development. Now if you then add to that the people who've contributed the ideas that have constituted socialism, which of course Robert Tressel reflected, go back to the Garden of Eden, am I my brother's keeper? That's a very, very radical idea, because if you're a brothers and sisters keeper, then an injury to one is an injury to all. United we stand divided before you do not cross the picket line. I always thought that came from the Book of Genesis and not from the Kremlin. And then, of course, you had John Ball, things will not go well in England till all property is held in common, 1381. Then you had the diggers, the earth is a common treasury, it is a crime to buy and sell the earth for private gain, and you had Robert Owen, and you had Mark, and Tressel. Now the important thing about Tressel, why I think his book sold, is it over 1 million, is it 2 million copies in 6 languages? I've always got a new copy of Tressel because I give my old ones away. And I remember on a bus once I saw a couple of house painters, and I said to them, have you ever heard of Tressel? And the old man said, oh, of course I have. And he said to the youngster, have you read it? So he said, I haven't. So he said, go and buy it straight away. But I've given away more copies of Tressel, Ragged Trousers, than any book I've ever had. And it is important because what he did was to look at society from the bottom up. And in Mugsborough, the building workers rebuilding that big house, really just by their discussions and their comments, they explained why we hadn't made as much progress as we might. Because, after all, exploitation has two sides, the people who want to exploit you and the people who seem to be prepared to be exploited. And what, and the reason the book is called The Ragged Trousers of Philanthropies, what Tressel was saying to them, you're very generous, you know, by the profit you make for your employer, you are a philanthropist. You may have ragged trousers, but you're giving money to the rich. Isn't that very, very kind of you? And that was a very, very important contribution. A beautiful novel and all. It was very tragic and very sad, very authentic. But it really was a very, very important way of explaining things. And now they've rediscovered Newman's cemetery. Eric Heffer himself, one of the building trade workers, in Walton, I think his old constituency in the Walton Cemetery, they've redone it and put it there. And he must be remembered as one of the great thinkers, but representing the unrepresented. But also it's so funny the way he deals with local government. When the gas company is making a profit, then they privatise it. When it's making a loss, they municipalise it, and the gas tax to see the competition. And those two lovely papers, the Daily Obscurer and the Weekly Chloroform, I mean, the Sun and the Sunday Times exactly sum up that way of looking at it. And what an extraordinary influence that book has had. And of course, the other thing was it was expurgated. And now we have on the website, you could see the real thing because it was thought too revolutionary. So I'll finish just by saying one word about the durability of socialism. The Soviet Union, born in revolution, undemocratic, or biggest socialist party, allegedly communist party of the world, just folded because they had no consent. But we mustn't forget that another threat to socialism was the Social Democrats, who just adopted uncritically market forces. Market forces are now the ruling principle in the social democratic parties of the world. You've got to privatise, you've got to introduce the market into education, you've got to do all the things that Cresswell would have been totally opposed to. And yet, when you look at the world globally, the exploitation that Cresswell discovered in Mugsborough is going on a global scale every day. And there must be people all over the world who say, well, what's the point? You know, this is the way it is. They know better than we are. The power is not for the likes of us. And so you come back to educate, agitate, organise. That's what the whole thing is about. But if you're going to do it, people have to have confidence in themselves. And the system is designed to break people's confidence from the day they're born to the day they die. The 11 plus breaks your confidence, naming and shaming, league tables, and dare I say it, management consultants. I don't know if you've heard the story. It's my favourite story of management consultants. Somebody sent me a letter, I don't know who wrote it, which exactly illustrates this point. It was about a boat race between the BBC and the Japanese crew. That was when Burt was there, and he was a brilliant manager, wasn't much of a broadcaster, very good manager. And they had this race, both the BBC and the Japanese practiced long and hard, and the Japanese... So Burt set up a working party, as you would, and the working party concluded the Japanese had 8 people rowing and 1 steering, and the BBC had 8 people steering and 1 rowing. So he did, and faced with a crisis of that magnitude, he employed management consultants. And a year later, the management consultants reported, they confirmed the diagnosis of the working party, and they recommended the BBC crew be completely restructured with 3 assistant steering managers, 3 deputy steering managers, a director of steering services, of course, and the rower be given an incentive to row harder. And they had another race, and this time the Japanese won by 2 miles, so obviously they laid off the rower for poor performance. And they sold the boat and used it for a higher than average pay award for the director of steering services. Now, you can laugh, but I mean, there is something about the sort of high priests of capitalism, our management consultants, and if you're ever going to change it, you have to have confidence in your own ability. Confidence is the most important thing, and what Cresswell does is to try to give people confidence. He confirmed what Adam Smith said, actually. Adam Smith said, the rich are the pensioners of the poor. And that's exactly what Cresswell said. They live off our backs. And so this is a very important book. And with the help of my grandchildren, I shall get my laptop to put onto this, and I shall enjoy it. And thank you for inviting me to participate in what is, in my opinion, a really important event, because it makes labour history available to people who've got an awful lot to learn from it, and who, in their turn, will be making the labour history of tomorrow. Thank you very much.